Okay, so we're reading the Haftorah from the book of Judges, Shoftim, and we're reading about a judge named Yiftach, who is an interesting character, as we will read. Just an introduction for a minute of the connection to the Parsha. So in this portion, we read how the Jewish people, when they came too close to Israel, there were three nations surrounding Israel that the Jewish people were told by God that they're not allowed to attack or even provoke. And those three nations are nations that were our relatives. They include Edom. Edom was the descendants of Esav, Jacob's brother. And they also include the two nations of Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab were Lot, Abraham's nephew's two sons. It's really his grandsons also, but that's another story. The bottom line is that we were not allowed to conquer these three countries, Edom in the south and Ammon and Moab in the east. And in this week's Parsha, we talk about how the Jewish people, when they were coming close to Israel, so they were coming up north and they hit the southern border and they wanted to pass through the land of Edom. And they sent messengers to their cousins and says, could we please go through? Edom did not allow. So the Jewish people had to go a detour all around and go travel east and then north and come around full circle. When they come full circle, they have to bypass the two countries of Ammon and Moab. Again, they say, could we pass through? They say, no, you can't. So we had to continue. And finally, the Jewish people, there was the king of Sichon, there was two kings, Sichon and Og, the king of Emori, which is a different nation, and Bashan, and they come to attack the Jews. The Jews conquered their land, and the Jewish people conquer a nice chunk of land east of the Jordan, and now they are at the bank of the Jordan River, ready to cross into Israel. That happens in this week's Parsha. This Parsha, this Haftorah, is 300 years later, when there's 2.5 tribes of Israel living on the other side of the Jordan, on the eastern side of the Jordan. And then this nation, our cousin Ammon, comes and attacks and wants to take the land back. And now we need a judge to save the Jewish people. In this story, Yiftach is this judge. The Haftorah talks about how he goes and he gathers and he defends the Jewish people, and he pushes back the king of Ammon. But before he goes to war, he has this whole conversation. And the conversation, he talks about the history. And he says, why are you here? We never provoked you to war. And the king says, well, you took our land. He says, we didn't really take your land. And he goes through the whole history. So that's the connection between the Haftorah and the portion, and that is that the history of the Jewish people's conquest in that region is retold in the Haftorah, told for the first time in the Parsha, and retold in the Haftorah. So that is introduction number one. Introduction number two is what is happening here, and what's the big picture? The big picture is, as we discussed last week, we are in the era of the judges. In the era of the judges, there's no established leadership. And the pattern was that when the Jewish people needed help because of an invading force, somebody would show up, and different types of characters. Most of them were very spiritual as well, but not all of them. And they would sort of push back the enemy, and then and then their role would cease. It wasn't like they weren't necessarily leaders that would lead the people in times of peace. There was just sort of a one-time event to protect the people in time of war and time of oppression. And because that's the model, not always was there there was no established monarchy or established dynasty whose job it was to lead the people both in times of peace and times of war. And therefore, at this moment of crisis, who do you go to? Who do you turn to? You don't always turn to the person who's the most, you turn to whoever you can. And this is an example. Yiftach is considered the leader, but as we will see, he does not come from a prominent family, and he is not necessarily a prominent person. At the end, you will see in the story, it's actually not in the Haftorah, but it's in the end of the chapter. It's a very sad story, which is a terrible story that happens with his own daughter. And we will discuss that as well. And part of the point here is is that just because somebody is good at leading you in the battlefield, it doesn't mean he's a moral leader. It doesn't mean he knows he's the right person for the job of leadership. And Yiftach certainly was not. But you don't get it from the Haftorah. You'll have to read the verses after the Haftorah to see the tragedy of the story. Hopefully I think we'll be able to do that, hopefully. So it's quite a long Haftorah. So I'm going to try to share the screen and read through it relatively quickly. And if anybody has any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. Here we go. Let's see if we can share. Judges chapter 11, verse 1. Now, Yiftach, the Giladite, he was from Gilad. Gilad was the region east of the Jordan, was a mighty man of valor. He was strong. And he was the son of a woman harlot. And the Gilad begot Yaphet. So basically, Yiftach, we got Jephthah. I'm going to call him Yiftach. So basically what happens here is that this person is Yiftach. His mother was a harlot, and therefore he wasn't considered a legitimate child, and he was the son of Gilad. Now there were other, verse 2, and Gilad's wife bore him sons, and his wife's sons grew up and drove Yiftach out. And they said to him, you shall not inherit in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. So the legitimate sons, the sons of the wife, chase Yiftach out of the home because he's not an illegitimate child, he's a son of a harlot. What does Yiftach do? He runs away. Yiftach fled from his brothers. Verse 3, Yiftach fled from his brothers, and he dwelt in the land of Tov. And idle men were gathered to Yiftach, and they went out with him. So they were idle men, but he was strong, and they was the band of people sort of rejected from society. And it was after many days, and the children of Ammon made war with Israel. Again, Ammon is one of those nations that are our relatives east of the Jordan. We're not allowed to take their country, their land. Verse 5, and it was when the children of Ammon fought with Israel, and the elders of Gilad went to take Yiftach from the land of Tov. They realized they need somebody to protect them. There's nobody to protect them. So who are they going to go to? They're going to go to that illegitimate kid who was rejected from his family, but now we need him, and if we need him, maybe we can use him. So that's what happens. Verse 6, and they said to Yiftach, come and become our chief, and we will fight with the children of Ammon. We'll give you the job. You'll be the chief. Skipping to verse 7. And Yiftach said to the elders of Gilad, do you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? So why have you come to me now when you are in distress? He says, till now you didn't need me. You were silent when they threw me out of my father's house. Now you're in distress. Now you come. And the elders of Gilad said to Yiftach, therefore we return to you now, and you shall go with us, and you will fight with the children of Ammon, and you shall become our head over all the inhabitants of Gilad. In other words, we will make you the leader. Verse 9, and Yiftach said to the elders of Gilad, if you bring me back to fight with the children of Ammon, and the Lord delivers them before me, I will become your head. Verse 10, and the elders of Gilad said to Yiftach, the Lord shall bear between us. If not according to your words, so will it be. So they promise to God will be the witness that that's what's going to happen. If you win the people of Ammon, you will lead us. And Yiftach went out with the elders of Gilad, and the people appointed him a head and a chief over them. And Yiftach spoke all his words before the Lord in Mitzpah. Now, and Yiftach sent messengers to the king of the children of Ammon, saying, what is between me and you that you have come to me to fight in my land? And here comes the history. So the first thing before you go to war, let's negotiate. So he sends messengers to the king of Ammon. He says, why are you coming to my land to fight? Verse 13, and the king of the children of Ammon said to the messengers of Yiftach, because Israel took away my land when they came out of Egypt, from Ammon and up to the Yabok and up to the Jordan, and now restore them peacefully. He says, what? You took our land. Yiftach says, we didn't take your land. What are you talking about? So verse 14, and Yiftach continued and sent messengers to the king of the children of Ammon, and he said to them, so said Yiftach, Israel did not take the land of Moab and the land of the children of Ammon. Remember these two nations, Ammon and Moab, they're our cousins. They're the sons of Abraham's nephew. We didn't take your land. And he gives the history, because when they came out of Egypt, verse 16, because when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness up to the Red Sea, and they came to Kadesh, And Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom. Remember, there were three nations. Edom was the third nation they can't conquer. And Edom was the third nation that they cannot conquer, and they and our relatives, and we asked them for their help. Give me just a second. I'm going to look for if I can find a map of. If I can find a map, I'll show you the map. Kingdom of Edom. Okay, let's share. Let's see if we could share the map here. Let's see if we could share the map. I don't know if you can see the map. Share. Okay, let's look at this guy. How do I make this bigger? How do I make this bigger? Okay. So the Jewish people are coming up from Egypt. They're coming up south. They're coming up north. This is the south. King of Edom is the children of Esau. We can't conquer them. King of Moab, we can't conquer because they're our relatives. King of Ammon, these are the people that now invaded the Jewish tribes. We can't conquer them. So we had to come make a big detour around Edom, around Moab, around Ammon, and then I don't think this map is accurate. I think Ammon ends sort of over here, but it doesn't matter. The point is we had to go around, and then we conquered all this region, Sichon and Og, the lands of Sichon and Og. So now the king of Ammon says, you conquered my land. We said, so Yiftach says, no, we didn't. We came up from Edom, and you're going to see we went all the way around. So we'll get back to this in a minute. We'll get back to the maps in a minute. Get back to. Okay, back to business. So Yiftach said, no, Yiftach, verse 15, and he said to them, so said Yiftach, Israel did not take the land of Moab and the land of children of Ammon, because when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness of the Red Sea, and they came to Kadesh, and Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, let me pass now through your land. And the king of Edom did not listen. And also the king of Moab he sent, and he was unwilling, and Israel abode in Kadesh. And when they went through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and they came to the east of the land of Moab, and they encamped on the other side of the Arnon, and they did not come in within the border of Moab, or for the Arnon was in the border of Moab. And Israel sent messengers to Sichon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon, and Israel said to them, please let us pass through your land up to my place. And Sichon did not trust Israel to pass through his border. And Sichon gathered all his people, and they camped in Yahatzah. And he fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, delivered Sichon and all his people into the land of Israel, and they struck them. And Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that land. And they possessed all the border of the Amorites upon the Arnon up to the Yabok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. And now the Lord of God of Israel has driven out the Amorites from before his people Israel, and you want to possess it? And here you get some poetry, verse 24. Is it not that which Chemosh your God gives you to possess, that you may possess, and all of which the Lord our God has driven out from before us, that we shall possess? He says, you take what your God gives you. Their God was Chemosh, that was his name. We get what our God gave us. And now he goes to some more history. And now, are you better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive with Israel? Did he ever fight against them? When Israel dwelt in Heshbon and its towns, and in Ararat and its towns, and all the cities that are along Arnon, 300 years, why did you not recover them at all that time? He says, this war that you're claiming that we took your land was 300 years ago. What about all the other kings of Moab and Ammon? They didn't speak up. Are you better than them? In other words, if they didn't come, why are you coming to fight? Verse 27, and I have not sinned against you, and you were wrong with me by fighting against me. And the Lord, the judges, decide this day between the children of Israel and between the children of Ammon. And the king of children of Ammon did not listen to the words of Yiftach, which he had sent him. And the spirit of the Lord was upon Yiftach, and he passed over Gilad and Menashe, and he passed over Mitzvah of Gilad. And and from the Mitzvah of Gilad, he passed over to the children of Ammon. And so he's going out to the battle. And here's a very key verse, which we get to the story, the tragedy that happens later. It's not in the Haftorah, but it's a few verses after the Haftorah. We'll read it. 30, and Yiftach vowed a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the children of Ammon into my hand, and it will be, this is the oath, whatever comes forth that shall come forth from the doors of my house toward me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall be to the Lord, and I will offer him up for a burnt offering. So anyone who comes out of my home will be offered to a sacrifice to God. We presume he meant an animal, but that's not what happened. Verse 32, he's very successful in battle. And Yiftach passed over the children of Ammon to fight against them. And the Lord delivered them into his land. And he struck them from Aroer until you come to Minit, 20 cities, and up to Avel Cheramim, a very great slaughter. And the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. So Yiftach is wildly successful. Now we have to get to the rest of the chapter, which is, what are we reading? Judges 11. Here comes the tragedy. This is 34. And Yiftach came to Mitzpah, to his house. Yiftach comes home, and behold, his daughter was coming out toward him with timbrels and dances, and she was an only child. He had from her neither a son nor a daughter. In other words, she didn't have any children yet. And it was when he saw her that he rent his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have made me fall, and you have become one of those that trouble me. And I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot go back. In other words, I made a promise, and that I'm going to offer you as an offering, and I can't change my word. 36, and she said to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to that which was issued from your mouth, since the Lord had done for you vengeance from your enemies, from the children of Ammon. And she said to her father, let this thing be done for me, refrain from me for 2 months, and I shall go and wail upon the mountains, and I shall cry over my virginity, I and my companions. In other words, says, let's wait 2 months, I'm going to mourn for 2 months. And he said, go, and he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions, and she cried over her virginity upon the mountains. And it was at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he did to her his vow which he had vowed, and she had not known any man, and it was a statute in Israel. From year to year, the daughters of Israel went to lament the daughter of Yiftach the Giladite 4 days in a year, which is a horrible story. The simple meaning is that he killed his daughter, although some of the commentaries say maybe he didn't, maybe he didn't really kill her, maybe he what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe he allowed her to. In other words, he secluded her from marriage, and that was considered killing. There's different opinions. Now the question is, what's the story of, what's the takeaway, and what's the purpose? What is the message of the story really? And many people believe that what's really happening here is, again, we're pointing out a lot of the problems in the book of Judges is because the fact that there was not a central authority, and if there's no central authority, then when there's a crisis, you're going to turn to different people to solve the problems. The problem here was that Yiftach didn't understand his place. If you look back at the verses, you will see that when the people of Gilad first come to him and they offer him the job and they say, could you please lead us in battle? What do they say? They say, initially, they say, and they said to Yiftach, come and become our chief. And we will fight with the children of Ammon. Katzin is chief. But specifically the word katzin, even in modern Hebrew, katzin is a chief of police. It's like an officer. An officer means in the context of battle. So they never came and said, please be our leader. They didn't think that he has the background or the knowledge or the flexibility to be the leader. Instead, they say, could you please be our katzin? Katzin means, could you lead us in battle? What does he say? He says, I don't want to be your leader in battle. I want a deal. I want to be your leader, period. I want to be your leader even in times of peace. And if you look what he says, why are you coming to me? So now they have to sweeten the deal. In verse 7. And therefore, in verse, because in verse 7, he says, why did you come to me? You hate me. So in verse 8, they have to sweeten the deal. And the elders of Gilad say to Yiftach, therefore we return to you now, and you shall go with us, and you will fight with the children of Ammon, and you shall become our head. Not what we said before. Before they said, in verse 6, they said our chief, Katzin. Katzin means you'll lead us in battle. Head means you'll be our ruler. And Yiftach says, oh, that's a good deal. And verse 9 says, and Yiftach said to the elders of Gilad, if you bring me back to fight with the children of Ammon and the Lord delivers them before me, I will become your head. That's what he wants to do. He wants to be the leader, not just leader in battle, but the leader of the people. And that is something that that is the challenge of the era of the judges. In other words, we read last week how Samuel says a central strong government or dynasty, a dynasty has dangers. But the book of Judges is talking about the other danger. The danger is where there is no strong leadership, there is no dynasty. Every time there's a crisis, you turn to somebody and say, could you please help us? And in this case, the person was very good in battle, and he was considered very loyal in the sense he keeps mentioning God's name, and he actually in battle, he's very good. He has a negotiation, and if we can analyze the negotiation tactics, he's not just talking law, it's my land, it's your land. According to many opinions, what he's really doing, he really has a message. He's evoking all the victories of the Jewish people in the past, basically saying, don't mess with us. We overcame the superpowers in the past. Your ancestors were afraid of us. You should too. And he's very clever in his negotiation, and he's certainly very, very, very successful in battle. But that is not the skill necessary to lead. And therefore, he's criticized, Yiftach is criticized because he is ignorant to things that most Jews would know, in that you don't have to keep a promise. I know this sounds crazy, but in the Torah, there's the idea of nullifying a vow. It's in the written Torah. It's not explicit. In the written Torah, it's about a husband or a father, but in the Jewish tradition, you could nullify a vow, especially a vow that was done under duress. And especially if this wasn't, that your intention was never to offer a human being, your intention wasn't offer an animal. But he didn't have the training, and he wasn't exposed to the Jewish tradition to understand that he didn't have to keep his vow. And he also was somebody, according to the Talmud, that wouldn't take advice. And therefore, there's a critique of the sages of the time who didn't tell him you don't have to do it. Why didn't they tell him? Because he wouldn't accept it. Because the character of a general in the army is somebody usually who is decisive. He takes risks. He doesn't like to second guess, and he doesn't like to show weakness. And these characters are wonderful for battle, but not so good for leadership. So in other words, the big picture of what's happening here is this big picture of the story is pointing out the challenge of not having a proper leadership. So we do have leadership, we see the problems in leadership. We do see corruption, we see abuse of power, and these are all serious problems. But we have to forget that the idea of the other extreme, where there's no leadership at all, and whenever there's a problem, you have to find a temporary solution. That system has problems as well. And that's probably a big theme in the book of Judges, but certainly a big theme with the story of Yiftach. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. Comments, questions, please share. Otherwise, we'll see each other in good health. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is a troubling story and it raises a lot of questions. First question comes to mind: does the daughter of Yiftach, does she have a name, or she just goes because does she have her own identity? Why didn't she, protest? And her mother, and also Hashem. I mean, how did he let that happen?
About Hashem doesn't always interfere unless it was necessary for the battle. But the question, the Talmud said, the Talmud questions the rabbis. How come the rabbis of the time, the people, knowledgeable people of the time, did not speak up and they critique them? Some people say because he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to listen. Remember, the person who's who's in battle is not always the person who's going to listen to advice about things that he doesn't know, and then he has to acknowledge that I don't understand how the process of nullifying vows. I need the expert of the court. It's not something that he was open to accept advice.
But what about the daughter? Does she have a name? And her mother, why did they go along?
The problem with the daughter is that she also is raised in Yiftach's house, and she also was not exposed to the Jewish tradition. She also thinks, in biblical times, she thinks that the idea of keeping your vow is more important than human life, right? So it's not about, we're not critiquing her, but we're critiquing the environment in her father's home to which she grew up in. Remember, he ran away from Israel. He went to a distant land, a land of Tob. We don't know exactly what it is. I don't know where it is, but the experts think they know. Certainly away from Israel, and he is surrounded by idle people, empty people. Right? He wasn't exposed, and he wasn't exposed to, not by any fault of their own. They were rejected by their family, which is part of the tragedy. Maybe that's the origin of the tragedy, because he was rejected by his family. So maybe he doesn't understand human compassion. Right? So maybe this is the abuse going over from one generation to the next.
Absolutely. And also morality falling, obviously. And that's how the children not understand their value.
Right, but the morality ties into the fact that because when they were not educated in a healthy environment, so they weren't exposed to the Jewish notion of morality.
Is that the end of the book of Judges, or
no, it's exactly the beginning. It's actually exactly the middle, and it's really a shift, because after this story, you see that the first half of the book, the judges that operate, like I mentioned, they operate periodically. They only come in the moments of crisis. After the war, they go home. From this point and on, there's a shift, and the judges are asked to stay. In other words, the judges who led for a longer period of time. And actually, up till this point, it doesn't say they judge the people. It says they save the people, and the pattern would be after the war, it would say, and the land was quiet for 40 years. After this point, it says, and this person judged the people for 40 years. So there is a shift and a development where people understand that we need to have the judge, the guy that we're going to turn to in crisis, the guy or the woman, because sometimes there are women in the era of the judges, like Devorah. The person who's going to save us has to also be involved in times of peace. So Yiftach starts that pattern, but he's the wrong guy for that job. He was very good for the one time. He's very good for the first half of the book, not very good for the second half of the book. You see what I'm saying?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And I guess the message is don't reject people, because when you reject somebody, a generation later, you could see the negative outcome. So intergenerational abuse is, I think, what we're reading about.
Right. Thank you so much,
Have
Rabbi.
a wonderful day. Be well.
Thank you.
Take care.